Hi friends, today I want to teach you a little bit about clefs. Clefs are symbols we use in music to tell us what note we should play. The current clefs that are used in music today include the treble, the bass, the alto, and the tenor. The treble clef looks like this. It is actually just an old-fashioned G. It literally means that the second line, where the circle is, from the bottom, is G. And all you need to do is count up or down the alphabet in relation to G. That's all it means. It's nothing more complicated than that. And the treble clef is used for high voices, which would be sopranos. Altos typically use soprano or treble clef too. Almost all high instruments, violin, oboe, flute, trumpet, and even many instruments that go relatively low. For example, baritone saxophone, oddly enough, uses treble clef, even though it would use a much lower one if it played its written pitch. But because it transposes, it actually plays notes that don't look anything like what they sound when they come out of the instrument. The bass clef looks like this, and believe it or not, that's supposed to be a letter F. At least in the old days it looked like a letter F. And what it meant is the second line between those two dots, where the dot there is hanging, is F. And that means for low notes. So, for example, cello, low-voiced singers, basses, baritones, trombone, tuba, double bass, of course, bassoon. The vast majority of instruments, though, just use the treble clef, like I explained before. Another clef that we use occasionally, although somewhat rarely, is the alto clef. And that looks like this. It literally is a C clef. What it literally means is that the center line, or the whatever line it's on, I should say, is C. So that means you just need to count up and down from that center line, and you'll know where you are. The very few instruments use the alto clef. Viola is the only common orchestral instrument that does. I believe mandolin does too, which is peculiar because mandolin plays the exact same notes as a violin, but violin uses treble clef. Music is very complicated. The alto clef, the only instruments that have to learn to use it are violas. So those poor violists have to learn a clef they have to play all by themselves. And they usually have to learn treble clef as well, because viola typically goes high, and in fact many violists double on violin and vice versa. You have much better chances of getting gigs if you can play both or even more string instruments. The last one on here is the tenor clef. That one is not standard for any instruments, except that sometimes the instruments go into the high ranges that require tenor clef. Cello does this quite often, trombone, bassoon, and sometimes those instruments could even go into the treble clef range. Personally, I wish they'd just switch right over to treble. It would be a lot easier for me to read, but what do I know? I don't play cello. But I do play bass, and bass does go into tenor clef too, which I always had difficult time reading. I always disliked going into tenor clef. I always hoped that it wouldn't do that this time, and it never worked out that way. Here is all the clefs total, actually, in all of music. Most of these I'd never even heard of before I looked them up. I've never heard of French violin clef. I guess that would make the G the bottom line. I don't know. I guess French violinists use that clef at some point. The soprano clef. We have the mezzo soprano, which means medium soprano. Alto, of course. Tenor, baritone clef. I've seen the one with the C clef, but I've never seen one with the F clef. That's interesting. And then, of course, the bass clef is common, and then the sub-bass clef, which I don't know what instrument would use that. I suppose theoretically you could make any clef you wanted. Another clef that we see pretty common is the neutral clef. I usually just think of it as the percussion clef. This doesn't actually play any notes, or at least any pitches. It tends to be, for drums and percussion, a different space or line refers to a different drum. For example, the bass drum is usually the bottom space. Snare drum is usually this space. Crash cymbal is usually what looks like middle C if this was a treble clef, etc. So every cymbal has a different note on the staff, so the drummers can get precise notes to play in a drum set. Well, I hope that gives you a little bit of information. That's all the clefs that we typically use. Very common. Piano, of course, only ever plays the treble and bass clef in the grand staff. Of course, the grand staff piano will sometimes go into both hands doing treble clef, both hands doing bass clef, and even sometimes vice versa, which I always like to do. Anyway, I hope that gave you a little bit of information. I'll talk to you later. Have a good day. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye-bye.